Welcome to Buckets. This is Action Network's WNBA betting podcast presented by BetMGM. This is our best bets episode for Friday, July 12th. Nice little 3-game slate on Ion. I am your host, Maria Marino, along with the oh-so-reliable Jim Turvey. And let me just get this out of the way now. Disclaimer. Sounds okay right now, but I'm currently in Barclays Center in Brooklyn. We're about an hour and a half away from tip-off between the Liberty and the Sky. There may or may not be some music pounding in the background any minute now, but if that happens, it'll just sound like it's a party. So hopefully all who are listening will be having as much fun as I am. But Jim, how are you feeling tonight?
I'm feeling good. Yeah, it's great to see you at Barclays. You mentioned right before we started recording, you're like posted up right before where our little action group hang was. So it's, we're getting the vibes of even, flashback all the time ago, 2 weeks ago when we all got to hang out in Barclays. So should be a good game tonight. But yeah, it's a weird Friday slate. It's not my favorite Friday slate, but I got a couple bets here and there. We'll at least talk through the games and maybe why they're a little bit weird.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. So I'm directly behind the row where our Buckets crew, where we all had our tickets. So vibes are immaculate, but I will say this as well, just in case the music gets a little loud, I will mute myself anytime Jim is talking. So just keep that in mind. I won't be interrupting him like I normally do. One other programming note before we get into the episode is, how we normally do the episodes Tuesday and Friday. Schedule remains to be a little weird going into Olympic break. I still want to bring you guys at least 2 episodes next week. So we're planning on Tuesday and Wednesday next week for episodes. As always, make sure you're just following the podcast so you don't miss anything. But that being said, Jim, do you want to start by giving us some best bets for Friday?
I have a singular best bet. Like I said, this is not my favorite slate, and it's not my favorite best bet. This is not Bridget Carlton to lead the game in threes, to say the least. But my favorite bet for Friday, Aces to win wire to wire against the Atlanta Dream, -144.
I'm cool with that. And you know what? Why don't we start with that game, since that's what you like? But just so everybody knows, we got the Mercury Fever as well and the Lynx Storm, which I think should be an excellent game. So we're definitely going to touch on both of those here in a minute. But since your best bet is Aces to lead wire to wire, let's get into that. 7:30 p.m. Eastern tip-off on Friday. I think the Aces are favored by 13. Did that move, Jim?
No, that's exactly what I was seeing as well.
All right, cool. So they are 14-7 straight up. They have moved into 4th place in the standings after beating Seattle on Wednesday. Great game. Only won by 5, but managed to cover that 4.5-point spread. Asia Wilson, of course, went off 24 points, 20 rebounds. I literally wrote I wrote WTF.
Yeah,
I wrote WTF in my notes. I was gonna swear. I try not to do the F-bombs, but I do swear occasionally, as you know. But yeah, the Aces have been pretty much rolling. A couple of blips in the radar, but 7-2 ATS since Chelsea Gray returned June 19th. And then on the Dream side of things, they lost 5 straight. They still have the injury issues. What else do you make of this matchup?
Yeah, the Aces seem like they are back, huh? They are absolutely rolling. You mentioned that they are, they've only lost 1 game since Chelsea is back. That was that kind of funky Sparks game. Sparks will kind of do that every now and then. So they're in our, growing list of teams that we're trying to maybe avoid because of wonkiness. The Dream are another of those teams, in all fairness. But I think there's a couple of factors here. First of all, since Chelsea Gray has moved into the starting lineup, moved back in the starting lineup, those first 2 games she came off the bench. But since she has been in the starting lineup, their net rating is now plus 14.5. So that we're basically getting back up into that level that they were at last year. A bunch of that was against, not the top competition in the league, but they did get that really nice win in Seattle. That is a very tough win, a very good win. They looked excellent. They looked like the Aces that, last year were about that level of a net rating team. So now we get them on the road in Atlanta. Atlanta's home court is far from the best in the W. They also, this is more narrative, but they, you mentioned we're approaching the Olympic break here and they have a couple injuries. They've kind of been stumbling a little bit. If any team seems like the team to kind of just fold it up and, be like, let's try and reset things after the Olympic break, the Atlanta Dream seem like that team to just kind of fold it in. they've really been bad in the first half all year as well. So that's where I'm kind of focusing on this wire to wire bet. Just to reiterate, if you haven't listened, I've given this bet out a couple times. What the wire to wire bet is, you don't have to lead the entire game. You just have to lead at the end of each quarter. So they have to win the first quarter, and they have to still have a lead at the end of the second. So they could be up 10 at the end of the first quarter, lose the second quarter, but still be up at the half, and then be up at the end of the third quarter and in the game. Or on the inverse, they could, fall behind 8-2 early in the game, but then catch up by the end of the first quarter, have the lead, and win the game. So it doesn't have to be every second. It doesn't have to be that they win every single quarter. Just they have to have the lead at the end of every quarter. So with the Dream being as bad in the first half as they are, the Aces looking like they are back to absolutely rolling, that's my best bet for this game on Friday.
I like it. And, I think sometimes, especially with a spread this big, you wonder, are they going to keep up that intensity the whole way through the game? But the reason I don't think that the Aces are going to be complacent in this particular spot is the Dream did upset them earlier in the year. It was an 8-point spread. The Dream, pulled it off, and that was way back on May 31st. Obviously, these two teams are in very, very different situations right now, but I just could see the Aces just kind of taking that personally and just not wanting to mess around and just wanting to own them. And also, you talked about the, home court advantage or lack thereof. The Dream are typically the lowest in the league in terms of average attendance. I mean, they do play in a smaller arena, so that's part of that, but still, it's not a home court that scares me, especially with so many of these key pieces. Ryan Howard still out. Jordan Canada, if you didn't know, did come back, then almost immediately, just a few games in, hurt her hand again, unfortunately. All right, so let's keep this rolling and go to the next game, yeah?
Let's do it.
All right, so we have the Mercury. This is a juicy one.
Yeah, it's a good game. Yeah.
Also a 7:30 p.m. Eastern tip. Mercury are favored by 2.5.
I think last I saw it may have jumped to 3.
All right. Let me check that.
I think part of what that might be is the injury report came out. It looks like Taurasi and Sugg Sutton are out, but Beck Allen will likely be playing again. So I think that maybe there was some questionable stuff there, but now it's and Temi Fagbenle got ruled out for the Fever. So I think that maybe all that injury news resulted in about a half-point move towards the Mercury. Do you still see it -3?
So I am seeing -2.5 in the market, but 3 seems like where it's moving, which certainly makes sense. Now I feel like I need to check the Action app just to be totally sure. And I want to use this opportunity to remind people, yeah, I'm still seeing -2.5 for the Mercury. Interestingly, curious if that'll change at all. But if you're not using the Action app, use it, because that way you can track the line movement. You can shop for the best lines, all of that good stuff. Plus, you can see what I'm picking if I remember to track my bets on time, and what Jim Turvey is picking. And you got to follow him because, obviously he's money. That's why we have him on the show.
Cardoso rebounds. That was your last bet, right?
I was happy. Cardoso got a double-double the other day. That was I think the bet that I gave out on our last episode with J Money, her to go over 8.5 rebounds. So I'll own that one. I missed the day before on Rakia Jackson. That didn't pan out, but that's why I probably won't bet on the Sparks, at least in
Sparks
terms of props.
are in that tier of teams that are just not fun to bet on.
They're in my doghouse just because, as we've talked about, Kurt Miller, he's experimenting way too much for my liking. Okay, that being said, let's talk about this game. And I'm glad you had the injury report handy. Diana Taurasi out, you said.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
Taurasi likely will be out, or has been ruled out.
Okay.
Sugg Sutton as well, and then on the Indiana side, Temi Fagbenle. I honestly think this could be another pretty big Caitlin game. She has been playing out of her mind right now. She had 29 points in her most recent game, but really it's the playmaking that has really popped. If you look at her last 6 games, her assist totals 13, 7, 12, 11, 13, 13. These are she's tracking towards numbers that could potentially break all-time assist per game records if she's able to maintain this sort of a level through the rest of the season. So this Phoenix team is a team that is a good team, but they give up a lot of assists, they give up a lot of points, they give up a lot of threes. Caitlin has had success against them, and I really think that this is the type of game where I kind of lean towards the Mercury side of things, but I really think Caitlin could have a really strong game. I'll talk through why I like the Phoenix side of it, but I'm wondering if what your thoughts on Caitlin and the Indiana side of it are.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a bummer because the Fever have this great game against the Liberty where they upset them. They have one of their best games all season. It seemed like they they found something, and then they fell flat against the Mystics the other day, which scares me a little bit. Now, I know the Mystics have been very competitive, even though they haven't won a lot of games, but still, that's a game that Indiana should win. Now, of course, there was a change to the starting lineup. Melissa Smith came off the bench.
She did start the second half, so I'll be pretty curious to see if she's back in the start, if that was just a motivational, type thing. Because, yeah, I think we were both on her rebounds over maybe, and it was like, oh, come on, is she really not starting today?
I actually wasn't on that, but I was seeing a lot of people in our WNBA Action Slack wondering about it, and some other folks wondering about it. Yeah, I do wonder. Christy Sides was very vague when asked point blank about it, and so that makes me think that maybe it was just like a message send of some kind, which is unfortunate. And yeah, obviously have to question the decision because they played so bad in the first quarter. And I'm not saying that that's all because of Melissa Smith. I don't know what the vibe was, but for some reason they just, granted, it was a camp day game, so you're talking about 11 a.m. Eastern local time tip-off, but still, that should not be an excuse when the other team's, dealing with the same thing. But yeah, Lexi Hull slotted into that starting lineup. So we'll be keeping an eye. I'm curious about the rotations with them. You would think that they would be, Caitlin Clark, I'm sure, is pissed. She's going to be motivated for a bounce back. We got to remember, too, that the last time the Fever played the Mercury, it was also one of their best games of the season. That was when they won 88-82 in Phoenix, and that was on June 30th. If you recall, Kalia Copper was D'ing up Caitlin like white on rice. It was like she was all over her from the start of the whole game, and it just turned out that I don't know if this affected her scoring, but she only scored 7, and she played great defense on Caitlin. Remember, Caitlin had all these horrible turnovers in the first half. She recovered a little bit though.
Yep.
Ended up with almost a triple double, 15, 12 assists, 9 boards. Our girl Melissa Smith, 12 points, 15 rebounds. BG had 24, Taurasi had 19. So I do wonder with Taurasi out if the Fever can sort of pounce on them a little bit, although the Mercury have other shooters that could step up.
Yeah, so the last game that Taurasi, that last game Phoenix played, the look that I was on was points over for Kalia, BG, and Cloud. All 3 of them, they're points over because they were going against the wings. I figured a defense this bad, 2 out of 3 of these are going to hit. The projections, all 3, it ended up that all 3 hit. Literally all 3 went over their number. I think I'm going to run this back likely. Unless they overcorrect when we don't have the player props out just yet. So I'll have to, see what they post. But against a Fever team that is still not a good defense, and especially at these positions is not outstanding defensively, I think I'm probably going to be looking at those 3 players on their points overs again. Without Taurasi, this Phoenix team just doesn't have all that much scoring. Sutton as well. Sutton is, one of their top scorers off the bench. If they're really leaning on Copper, BG, and Cloud, all 3 of them have shown the ability to step up and improve their scoring when needed. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I think it's going to be a high-pace game. I'm probably going to play all 3 player overs. I might even look at Caitlin overs. If you're an overs person and you kind of like the big names getting their overs, I think this is the game where you want to play them separately or even toss them in the same game parlay. I could see that being, I think a lot of people love to do those, big name people getting their stats. This is the game to kind of, if you're targeting Friday's slate, this is a game to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know too that it just seems like every team, when they play the Fever, they're just showing out. And you're going to probably see another near sellout, if not a sellout, at Indiana. That home court has been so great for them. I kind of lean the Fever's ability to cover here, but I might see how the line continues to move. I might stay away from it and see what's going on live and then make a determination from there.
Yeah, the Fever had been really, really bad in first quarters to start the season. I will say they've gotten a little bit better since that schedule broke, and it hasn't been as crazy and tough. They've actually been more of like a neutral team, but they still don't start games well. They've never started games well, so you still might be able to get that live look if they stumble a little bit out of the gate. Phoenix hasn't been a great team in the first half either, so none of the half or quarters things pop for me. But I do think if you're watching the game, I mean, just that last game against Washington, we saw Indiana does have the ability to make up a lot of points really quick. That looked like a blowout, ended up being a really close game, almost went to overtime.
Okay, the music volume has gone up just a tad, in case anyone is wondering.
I saw you getting some moves in there.
Yeah. I'm dancing a little bit, I'm bopping a little bit here. But I am curious to see just what the adjustments are for Phoenix, because they're remembering too, like, I could have won that game the last time. Kalia Copper in particular.
You mentioned Copper shoots 3 of 15 last game. I do not see that happening again. But on the Indiana side, so Phoenix gives up the most threes per game, and Caitlin got off 10 of them. She only made 2. I would imagine if she gets 10 threes a game, she's more likely to hit 4, maybe even 5, probably in that 3 to 5 range than 2 again.
And I don't want to discount what Copper was able to do on her defending on ball, but I also think that Caitlin has grown since then, and this team, they're gelling a bit more. I think some of the silly turnovers Caitlin is doing a little bit better with. I say that now.
I was like a very little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, she still gets a few, but like those ones were like, there were egregious ones. I remember so vividly against Phoenix that I'm not expecting that again necessarily. But anyway, should be a super fun game. Let's keep it moving. We got one more game to talk about here on Friday night, and this is another good one. The Lynx in Seattle. This is a 10 o'clock Eastern tip. The Storm were favored by 3.5, and here I go back to the Action app to check. Still seeing 3.5.
And that's interesting because right before I came on, I was seeing 4. So for both of these, I wonder if that's the way stuff is moving, or if they popped and then they moved right back, and actually these lines are pretty steady. So yeah, you mentioned this is a really good game. I'll let you set the scene a little bit more, but I think this is, if you want the best basketball of the night, This is definitely the game to watch.
Yeah. You got to stay up a little bit later if you're on the East Coast. But yeah, so the Lynx remain one of the best teams in the W, and also one of the best teams against the spread. 16-6 straight up, 14-8 against the spread. They won and covered on Tuesday at LA, which was kind of much needed because they had lost 3 in a row against the spread coming into that game. Clearly, we're thrown a bit for a loop with Nafisa Collier being out with that plantar fasciitis. We're not expecting to see her again before the Olympic break. And then on the Storm side of things, we mentioned they lost to the Aces Wednesday. Jewel Lloyd did have 28 points. I'm pretty sure her field goal percentage wasn't great, wasn't the most efficient, but they are 14-8 straight up and against the spread. 8-4 against the spread at home. Oh, get this. The Lynx have beaten the Storm 3 times this year. Twice at the very beginning of the season, which I don't really put much stock in, nor should anybody. But then again, June 9th, so a good month has gone by. But the Lynx waxed them that day, won by 19. So my thinking is, like, are they really going to make it 4? Are the Lynx really going to beat the Storm 4 times? And by the way, this is their 8th straight home game for Seattle. I just don't see it. I feel like, especially without Fee, the Storm realized, like, this is one they got to get. They're at home. I lean Storm here.
Yeah, this is the J Money, triple revenge, quadruple revenge, quintuple revenge, some sort of high revenge spot for J Money here. I lean towards the Storm as well. I am a little bit nervous about those past results because I do think part of it can be matchup wise. I mean, we've seen the inverse of it is that Minnesota, has struggled at times with other opponents as well. That when the matchups the matchups of it can matter. We saw it in the NBA playoffs. We're going to see it in these W playoffs as well, where there are teams that just for whatever reason either match up well with some teams and don't match up well with others. But I don't see any reason for Seattle not matching up well with Minnesota. Minnesota, what they do well is they spread it out, they shoot threes, and they limit threes. Seattle is a team that can handle an offense that's spread out. And Nneka Ogwumike and Ezi Magbagor, they have two of the most mobile front court defenders. And then they actually aren't all that reliant on threes. In Skylar Diggins-Smith and Jewel Lloyd, they have, especially Skylar, far more focused scoring at the basket. Jewel really can cook in the mid-range. I don't see a reason that Seattle should match up poorly with Minnesota, but you do have to look at the results and say, this season, it certainly hasn't gone well. One way in particular is that Jewel Lloyd, I mean, you mentioned maybe not having the most efficient game against the Aces. She has been really, really bad against Minnesota this season. She's 16 of 67. That's 24% from the field. Now, two of those, again, were to start the season with brand new teammates. I could totally see that just being you're trying to get back in the swing of things. But even that third game, she was 9 of 27. She had like a decent point total, but that's not an efficient game. It's not how you're going to beat the Minnesota Lynx, who are incredibly efficient and really do a good job of finding the best shot on every time down the court. So I do lean towards Seattle. You mentioned how good they are at home. They were 8-1 at home before dropping these two most recent games at home to Chicago and then to Las Vegas. So I lean on the Seattle side of things, but more so this is kind of the inverse of Phoenix and Indiana to me. This is a game where I'm be looking for a lot of player unders, two really good defenses. Skylar Diggins-Smith is one. I'll be looking at her unders. I know this is a very pro Bridget Carlton podcast. It made us a lot of money. If the books overreact, though, and they give us a point total around 12.5, I'm actually going to probably look to zag and be on the under for her. Seattle's a very strong defense. And with Fee out, she actually hasn't seen her field goal attempts jump. It's more that she's just hitting an insane amount of her shots. So I can see the books thinking, oh, she's scoring more because Fee is out, when in reality it's that she's hit a lot of her shots. Now, she's an incredible shooter and she's getting good looks. I wouldn't count on her to hit 60% of her threes moving forward. So I might look to be on some Carlton unders, mention the Skylar unders, leaning towards the Seattle side of things. But I actually think that the full game spreads for all three of these games are actually pretty well priced. And we'll have to do a little bit of we'll get creative, like the Aces with the wire to wire, or some of these same game parlays with the Phoenix big three going over, or in this game maybe Skylar and Bridget going under. So yeah, fun slate, but definitely kind of a little bit funky for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I told you on the podcast that you do, Bet She Wins, that I tend to not really bet player unders because it's like the purist in me. But I feel like at some point I'm going to have to move over to the dark side.
Yes.
and get to doing that. But I mean, you're right about these two teams are so good defensively. And like Cheryl Reeve, I just got to keep praising her throughout the season because I feel like she's found a way for the most part. And like even the last couple games, I know they didn't play the best teams, but just the way that she's manipulated her personnel and made up for the absence of an MVP caliber player. Like, I know they're still going to bring it. I know they're still going to be competitive. But like I said, I would lean a Storm bounce back in this particular spot, just because I do think they have the talent to compete.
It does feel like the Fee missing is something that you can handle against the Sparks a lot easier than you can handle, and like kind of exponentially, not even just like obviously the Sparks are worse than the Storm. It's like an exponential thing where when you play these top teams without your star, it's much more noticeable than when you're playing a lesser opponent, where theoretically, again, we always talk about what players are worth this spread. Fee might be worth 4 or 5 points, but that might vary depending on if it's against the Sparks or if it's against the Storm.
Absolutely. All right. Well, the music is getting a little louder. I'm feeling like ready for the Liberty Sky game tonight. So I'm going to let you go. But I did want to say thanks to everybody once again for listening to Buckets presented by BetMGM. We are going to be back Tuesday with more best bets. I'm not 100% sure yet if Jim Turvey is going to be able to join us again before the Olympic break. But even if he
we're going to try.
Even if he doesn't, I'm pretty sure you will have some sort of Olympic-esque episode dropping on this feed moving forward. Also, if you like what you hear, leave us a review. We would really appreciate it. Make sure you, once again, if you don't already, use the Action app and follow us, because we might drop some more bets in there that you're going to want to be
definitely on
top of. All right, Jim, thanks again.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, let's get buckets.